Hello and welcome to another mini episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we will be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing The Spider and the Fly by Mary Howitt. Chris and I have adopted a Palestinian family that is currently still stuck in Gaza. Mohammed's neighborhood was bombed and killed 22 members of his family, leaving him responsible for his 4 younger siblings who were pulled from the rubble. We have their family's GoFundMe linked in the description, and they are very close to their goal. Please donate below. Don't forget there's a link below to sign up for our free newsletter where you can get more information and updates about us and the podcast. For more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter at LitLibPodcast. I'm your co-host Mariah, and you can find me at Hungry Rye on all social media platforms.
And I'm your co-host, Kristen. You can find me at KRXXTXN on all social media platforms.
So, this originally was not the book we were going to cover. However, I think it may be a blessing in disguise because the more I read about it and some of the themes in it, I think it's going to be very fitting. Mainly because I always get asked by parents who are leftists, like, oh, what children's books would you recommend? And I think this may be a kitty communist manifesto, and we're going to get into it in a little bit. But I don't know. Kristen doesn't have any memories of this book. She didn't ever read this 2002 book. But I did, and I thought it was very interesting, and it has a very morbid ending, which I very much enjoyed. So I don't know if you have any memories surrounding this poem, or even if you saw it in the library when you were a kid.
No, I thought maybe, it seemed, vaguely familiar, and I thought whenever I reread it, I'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember this. And I'm like, yeah, no. Literally nothing. Nothing jogged my memory as I was rereading it or anything like that. So I just haven't experienced this story, I think, where I just want to say Mariah said she was adding it to her Goodreads account towards her book roll. I did not do that. Just saying.
I didn't end up adding
Oh,
it.
because
I
you said
changed
you
my mind. I
were.
was just like, eh. I thought about it and I was like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I already added Bunnicula and all the other stuff,
I
so
mean,
it's like,
Bunnicula is a chapter book. I would not count picture books
yeah.
for my goal personally.
Hey, I read a lot of manga, and that's just
Well, that's not the
the
same as
pictures
a
with
picture
lots of
book.
words.
That's not the same thing as a
But this is
picture
like a
book. Like a
proper children's.
yeah. Like a kid's children's picture book, I would not count that as a book towards your goal. Unless that's the only books you're reading, then I would say yeah, you can add that. But I mean also your own goal is your own goal. It's whatever you want to do, what you would classify is what you want to count towards your reading goal, which I'm sure we could talk about in a whole other mini episode, but it won't be today. But I personally I don't read children's kids picture books, so I feel like it would be disingenuous for me to add it to my goal.
Yeah, so I don't know. You can add it if you don't. I don't. It's not gonna. I don't know.
You're
It's
gonna
a
get
kid's. It's a
hunted for
book.
sport
It's
if you add it
technically a
to
book.
your
I'm like,
Goodreads
you're a liar.
goal.
You know, I've added books with probably less substance to the goal or my
I don't know, is
goal
the
of last year.
tracker. Yeah,
Yeah,
because you be reading some
because I like
stupid
to keep
books.
track of what exactly I read and when I read it. But this is I don't want to get too far
Anyways,
off
well, I
topic.
was just saying I
Um,
read this and I didn't add it to my Goodreads, but I also have no memory of it now.
yeah, which is kind of crazy because the artwork on this in this book I think is what allured me as a child, and now as an adult, it's the actual substance of the poem by Mary Howitt. So I think it's an interesting turn of events, and I've been happy to be able to have this copy. I think I thrifted it because I was like, oh my god, I remember this book, and I've shared it with my kids, and I think they both have enjoyed it. This and the Stinky Cheese Man
Oh,
has
I
been
know the
a
Stinky
staple
Cheese
at my
Man.
house.
That's
Yeah.
more my wheelhouse. That book is kind of long though, isn't it? I remember it
Yeah, there's
being
a lot
thick.
of little stories in it,
Yeah, I remember.
which
I
we'll
definitely read
probably,
that as a
I'm
kid.
sure at some point we'll cover it and see what we can
That's
pull
not
from
really a
it and
Halloween book
memories.
though, so
But this one, when I looked up children's Halloween books was the thing I looked up for this one, and it popped up. So I thought it would be very fitting. And you know what? I think it is quite fitting because of the eeriness, and it also has a real world analogy, and I think that's what's most interesting to me. And it seems as though, historically speaking, because it's very difficult because of how old this poem is, to track just how popular it is because people weren't doing ratings
on
and
Goodreads. You're telling me people were
yeah.
reviewing books in the 1500s on Goodreads?
I know, isn't that crazy? But there was a illustrated poem by John Hayward, from 1556 that also discussed Spider and the Fly, which the Spider was the Protestants and the Fly was the Catholics. So it was like
Sorry, I'm just
between
laughing
the
at how
two of
you
them.
spelled fly.
No, that's how he spelled it back in the day in the
Why?
1500s. I have no
What?
idea. You're gonna say something. Flie is how they used to spell it in the
That's how they used to
1500s.
spell
I'm
fly?
That's in yes, in the article that I found with the pictures
That's
from like the
so
original
stupid.
thing, and it's so
People from the
funny because it doesn't
1500s are
even look
dumb. It
like
doesn't
it
look right. It
has
looks like
like
file
the
spelled wrong.
medieval art
Oh, like it's like written
with it.
curly and stuff.
Yeah, because the fly was like, or the spider was a Queen Mary, like Bloody Mary, and it was like during like their religious change where they went from like Catholic or like Catholicism to Protestantism, which I people like that's like a whole different topic is like
I'm sure we'll talk
why
about it
Queen
more in
Mary and
Bluefoot.
like Henry VIII. Yeah, that well, I don't know if we'll talk about Queen Mary, but
But we'll talk about
yeah.
Catholics versus Protestants, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, I think those will be a relevant theme. And then there was another author named Thomas
Rollinson?
Rowlandson.
No, there's no D at
I
the
don't know.
end.
I've
Just
never heard of
Rollinson.
anything, and there wasn't like a proper date on his piece of work, but he did have another poem during the Napoleon Age that was called the Corsican Spider in His Web, which apparently has a very similar theme. However, Mary Howitt's poem is the most renowned story that I think is probably the most important from what I have gathered. But also, I haven't like read them or studied the
But
historical context of the other ones. So
well,
I
that's
don't
what I'm
know.
saying. I wonder if it's just because the only reason why that one you think is the most impactful is because of capitalism, and that's the one that was like capitalized on, where that's the one that's been distributed and traditionally published in like a children's novel, and so that's the reason why you're viewing it as the most impactful, just because you haven't heard of the other ones. While like for me, I haven't heard of any of these, so all of these are like on the same level for me, you know?
Mhm. Well, in the article that I read, it was saying that historians kind of like it's not their favorite. Like when evaluating like
But what do they
a
know?
poem of Spider and Fly. I don't know, they're
Look
historians.
at
I
the
don't know what kind
history
of
that's
historians.
like depending on the historian, you know, you can see like how that can even influence his biases to what is relevant in popular culture today or what is relevant and still talked about within classics. Because I mean, like, not to like go off the rails, I think technically because this is considered a classic. I mean, I know that like people of color and stuff did not have the same opportunities to write and stuff, especially during like colonial America and stuff like that because of slavery. But other like places around the world, I feel like in our very like Eurocentric world now, we don't see a lot of classics from like minorities around the world.
Yeah,
And
which
so
I
I
think
wonder if
is
that's
why
why that like no offense to Mary Howitt, but I'm
mm,
sure she was like a an educated white woman where that might be
yeah.
why we're picking from her more than somebody else that could have wrote that story elsewhere that just never got traditionally published or propped up in that same way.
I think that's why there's a lot of gravitation, at least I've noticed from like it seemed like Lit Fit Girly to like New York Review Books because New York Review Books publishes books in English and translates them from different parts of the world so people are able to experience them. Which I think is really cool because often we don't see that. So we're getting to see like classics from other countries, from different authors, and see like the themes and whatnot that they have. So I haven't read any of them, but they are on my goal. It's probably gonna be my 2025 goal is to read more of those like fiction
I
work
think it's interesting
from
that
different countries.
that's just now starting to happen though, too. Like the
I don't know
fact
if
that it's
it's just
taken
because
so
it's a
long.
publisher, so I don't know how long
But I
it's been
thought it was like
around.
a new publishing thing. At least like people are just now starting to talk about it though. I feel like if it was more relevant around, like we would have been reading them in like English class or something, you
Yeah,
know? At least
I
like
don't know.
one
I
or
have to
like
look up more about them.
anyways, sorry.
This is just the way it goes. This is like the brain dumping that
Mhm.
happens when we're just like talking
We also haven't
IRL.
discussed this at all. Usually, I think we have
No,
more.
honestly, I didn't think you actually read it, so I was like, I wonder if she's just gonna show up and
No, I
just
read
really
it
like,
as I was getting ready this morning. Well, I
oh,
listened
that's
to the
funny.
book, you know? I mean, it's not that much
That's
to,
fair.
like, get dressed and listen to it. I mean, the video I had was only 4 minutes long too that read it, so it wasn't like I was like, "Hurry
Right,
up,"
it's
you
really
know?
short. I think what I really like about this, like looking back, is just like how it discusses exploitation and power dynamics, and like historically it shows a lot of imagery that used to be published in like radical presses where there's like the spider, which is somebody of the economic ruling class. And this one, you can look it up. I think it's by Puck, but it's about like the Wall Street film flam finance is what they call it, so there's like no name exactly put towards it. um where he's sitting in his web, and then there's like the public, which are flies in the bottom who are about to get lured into his web, which I thought was really cool. I did not know that this type of imagery existed until recently,
It's
and I
just like
thought
a
that was really
political
fun.
cartoon, isn't it? Or is it like an actual movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, no, no. It's just like a political cartoon. And this is just the only one that I saw from the article that I was reading, which I need to find the article and like copy and paste it in here so that other people can read it. But we'll get into like who this author was, which I was very surprised. That Mary Hewitt, born 1799, she was an English poet and translated many pieces of work from Hans Christian Andersen. And most of you should probably know who that is, but if not, he wrote literary fairy tales like The Little Mermaid, Ugly Duckling, Thumbelina, like everything that you have seen
On
on like
Disney.
Disney. Like they did a ton of adaptations of it. But I did find her politics. She supported abolition, women's suffrage, and temperance? Question mark. I don't know how that tied into it, but everything I was trying to read about her politics was in letters she had written to other people. I cannot decipher her
Handwriting.
cursive, so I could not read the first primary source, and there was no translation in it. So I don't know if that was intentional.
Like,
Maybe she was just too based for this world. I have no idea. So if you can read it and find it, let me know what it ends up saying. But it sounds to me that she was not a proper white feminist, and I really like that. But I could
you
be
mean
wrong.
like
This
white
is just my
feminists,
speculation.
like stereotypically like white women supporting other white women? Like, you think she was like a real
Yeah,
feminist?
she did it. Well, so like in regards to
Like
Angela Davis's Woman, Race, and Class, how
like
she
Elizabeth
talked
Cady
about like
Stanton.
Susan, yeah, how they abandoned the abolition cause in favor of women's suffrage as a priority rather than mixing the causes together.
But I wonder, well, because this is 1799, so this is a little bit before at least United States American suffragettes, and she would not have been around because I'm assuming she was born in England, so not here. So it's kind of interesting too that she supports abolition because, like, obviously in England they didn't have like slavery the same way that it was in the United States, and I feel like it's interesting that she would make that one of her causes that she was actively speaking out about whenever that's something. Usually, a lot of people, if it's not in front of them, they don't care, you know. And you can see that now with
Yeah.
current issues, anyways, you know. So,
So I'm not sure everything about her politics because she's not a super well studied individual
because she's
from
a
what it sounds
woman,
like. She wrote probably probably but she wrote other things. It looked like she wrote some like history of like the US, so I haven't read her historical like text. Like it's like a proper textbook. But it might be something of interest if anyone is curious about her. I don't know. I thought it was cool, but I guess we could get into your review and thoughts about the story, and then maybe we could talk about, I don't know.
okay.
We can. Well,
Well,
sorry, my brain is still trying to wake up. It's quite early right now, and my voice, I sound like I'm like, I don't know, have vocal fry. I'm Paris Hilton.
um. Anyways, well, I just read this book this morning. But, I thought it was almost too ambiguous because so do you know when this poem was published?
In the 1800s.
Like,
Let me see if I
before
can find.
or after Jack the Ripper? Because that's kind of where my mind was almost going because, I mean, Jack the Ripper was what, 1800s, right? I
I
mean,
think
I'm
so.
pretty sure. Because I felt like this could almost be like so 1888. So I guess maybe this is a little bit after her time, but I can imagine that like
So it came out in 1829, so
okay.
it's very early.
But I feel like at least in this time, this seemed more to me like at least like I haven't read the original poem, so I don't know if like Because I was wondering if the genders were changed in the original poem, where like the fly was originally a man from like her original poem, and then they changed it to be a woman in this particular illustrated version, because this was almost giving like women being abducted by like because she was in like a perilous circumstance, not like an exploitation of the working class to me. Like this with the way the
It looks
illustrations were. And so I was wondering if you could get that like the more Marxist like person being led into like a bad working environment sort of idea if the fly was originally male and they just changed it for like this. And I feel like this feels like a very modern adaptation of it, because I feel like that wasn't like the same issues as it is now, like, with like QAnon and stuff like that, about women being abducted from their street.
yeah. I guess I know, like, in this original book, it has the spider's conclusion where he's like, "And dear children," because it is like a children's poem,
Yes.
where he talks about like what it's supposed to mean and how like to extract a meaning from it. And it looks like the original one has like the same meaning. It says like
Well,
the from the PDF that I have. It says, "And now, dear little children who may this story read, to idle, silly, flattering words I pray you near give heed. Unto an evil counselor close heart, ear, and eye, and take a lesson from this tale of the spider and the fly." So it definitely like it is ambiguous in the sense like all children's
yeah,
stories are kind of they have to
overarching.
be like a little bit overarching, ambiguous, so that you can talk about it with like the parent. Like the parent can probably put whatever meaning behind it. However, I think this one is pretty straightforward with being like exploited by somebody who is kind of deceiving you, and that you should look and think critically about the situations that you're in and use all the information around you so that you don't fall trap to a perpetrator.
Well, that's what I was saying, where I feel like, at least like in modern times, I feel like obviously like you could get like the Marxist perspective about like a person going into like a precarious working situation because they're desperate for money, and so they're gonna like believe the lies that the greedy capitalist tells them so that they can possibly like survive or have their family survive or whatever. But I feel like because it's so ambiguous that like you'll get the liberals and the conservatives that are like, that's a stretch. This is stranger danger. You know what I'm saying? Like that sort of like thing. So I almost wish like obviously like it's a children's book, but like if there was just like that little bit more where it was like showing that like I don't know, like maybe like making it more clear that it was a worker, because, like, in my head, like, if this was published in, like, the 1800s, we know women were not working the same way that they were working later on, like, after the 1900s and stuff like that, so it feels like if the character was originally a woman in The Spider and the Fly, like, in Mary Howitt's original poem, then I could see it being more stranger danger, versus if the Fly was originally a male character, then I could see the more worker exploitation. Does that make sense? I know it's, like, gendered in a way, but I feel like because that's how society was, and whenever she published this, that's kind of what I would think would make more sense.
Yeah, from what it looks like in the this PDF that I found, it does still seem to be like gendered in that way. So,
So that's why I'm saying, like, I could see, like, people being like, "Oh, like, it's such a stretch," where, like, nowadays, we can take that. Because women are in the workforce just as much as men are now, we are able to have that sort of, like, discussion and be able to extract that meaning out, but that's why I'm worried that maybe Mary Howard did not have that original intention whenever she wrote this in the 1800s.
and I think that's why I really appreciated the little article that I had found
Mhm, I didn't
from
read that article,
Wilhelm.
but
Oh my gosh, you really should have. I think after this you should,
well, I
which I
didn't
had
have
to do a
time to
little
read
bit
it
of
before.
research of Wilhelm, who was a Marxist who pioneered a project to combine Marxist revolutionary theory with practical legal political activity. So basically, what I think democratic socialists want to be, right? However, he helped to start like the SPD, which was the same group that like 40 years later after its like conception ended up killing Rosa Luxemburg. So
Oh,
take that with a grain of take that with a grain of salt. I don't think that was the original intention. It seems like from this, I have to read more of his work, but of
Oh,
this article that was published in the Progress
oh my
Publishers in
gosh.
1883, Wilhelm Luck, I can't pronounce his last name. He seems pretty principled in the way he wrote about it. The summary of this on Marxist.org was that it was written for German workers, but based on a well-known children's story. His tale is of the exploiting. Um, sorry, his tale of the. Oh my God, why can't I say that? His tale is of the exploiting spider and the exploited fly, and it's written at a level for older children to handle. And I thought it was really interesting some of the stuff he said because you'll have to read through it. He like gives a synopsis, kind of like a more elaborate summary and also retelling of the story, but he ends up saying this as in a word, the fly is the oppressed, the enslaved, the exploited, while the spider is the vile speculator or lawless despot by whatever name he goes by. And then he goes on and talks about more stuff and he says like, let's break the chains that fetter us, let us drive our enemies from their hideouts, and let us throw the bright light of reason everywhere so that never again will the vile creature be able to do his murderous handiwork in the dark. And he just like goes on. It's like very like it's like almost reads like a manifesto for kids. You hear that? That was
Yeah,
Louis.
I definitely
I
heard
don't know
that.
what he's doing. But he says, like, oh, flies, if you wanted to, if you really wanted to, you could be invincible. True, the spiders are still strong today, but they are few. Even if you flies are quite insignificant and without influence, your numbers are legion. You are life itself. You are the world if you really wanted to. If you only united, you would at one blow of your wings tear apart all the threads, sweep away all the cobwebs that ensnare you today and that make you writhe and die of starvation. You could banish poverty and slavery if you wanted to, so learn to want. And I thought that was really cool. You should read the whole article in its entirety because I just think he builds upon what Mary Howitt said. So he's not like completely saying, like, no, this is wrong. It's like his own interpretation and building on it. I want to print this off and like do my own picture book and have it for my kids because I think it's just so fun to finally have something to share with them, and then you can discuss like class consciousness and also like class antagonisms from this perspective. So I
Hmm.
think it's really cool to see it be done a little bit different, not just like an ambiguous
Hmm.
predator and prey. We have a little bit more like Marxist theory that we have in this story, and I think it's fun.
Yeah, I do think I obviously didn't have time to read this essay either before I got on because I read this 5 minutes before I got onto here. But I will probably check it out because it does seem interesting where it does actually like do that like what I was missing in I mean, it's a children's book. I really wasn't expecting like all that much from it. I will be honest, like I understand it's a kid's book. It's not gonna be like kill your bosses and have an entire violent revolutionary like I obviously knew it wasn't gonna do that. Like it's a children's book. We're not stupid. But it will be nice to not have something so ambiguous that's just like cuz I feel like liberals can easily co-opt because on TikTok too, especially right now, we've been discussing liberals co-opting revolutionary speaking ways and like revolutionary vocabulary and stuff that liberals have been co-opting for years, and now it's finally starting to bite them in the butt because true revolutionaries and true left-wing people, true socialists and communists are like, okay, like you're saying you want to do like these ideas that we are spreading that we have been talking about for years and years, and we found out that like you don't actually mean what this means. Like you don't use that word genuinely. You're not using it as you want. You're using it to co-opt that language so that you can make your cause seem more palatable to left-wing people. Where I feel like this is one of those things that could easily be taken up from left-wing people and like put forth whatever message you want. And that I think is my major problem with most books having ambiguous endings where I feel like at least we'll have this version of like a true socialist like perspective of it and able to rework in that way where you could use that for your children if you're really wanting to have that talk about like exploitation versus this I think could easily be like co-opted to be like stranger danger, don't talk to creepy men, you know.
I agree. That's why I was on the hunt. I was like, there has to be something with this coming out. Like somebody had to have done this. And I think it's really cool seeing another person who is like, what, almost 150 years ago. I don't know. I'm not doing the math for that. To 2024 to 1883 or whatever. But they were doing essentially what we're doing on the podcast today because I know some people probably think like, why waste your time doing all this? But this is how you like get to people. Is like talking about literary themes and being able to apply a hundred. I was close. I was 9 years off. Um, but being able to talk about these themes in the context of something that people already know,
Hmm.
I think is really important. So that's why we're on this mission. This is like a really fantastic way of wrapping up the Halloween mini series. I know we're gonna get, I'm sure there's new listeners. We've been trying to post more on TikTok and bring more people in, but that is like what we're trying to do here. And I think it's just really, it's nice to see people doing it, and we are revitalizing something that has been done 140 years ago.
And we're not also acting like we're the only people doing this. I'm sure there are plenty of other like Marxist people that are, whether they're on TikTok or on Spotify in their own podcast or wherever they are, that are reviewing and talking about kids book or book talk books on left wing. We just haven't seen it anywhere, which is why we really wanted to have that ability for us to come on and be able to talk about it, because we already love reading fiction so much. So that's kind of why, like, I think me and Mariah wanted to do this podcast too, because I do think this is a lot more of an accessible way to talk about Marxism too, because nobody wants to read a textbook.
You speak for yourself.
But
Couldn't be
think
me.
in
I like
general.
reading it.
In
Yeah, I know
general.
a lot of people are very turned off by reading nonfiction. Nonfiction is not popular, and it just happens to be like my favorite genre, and I read it very like five, at least five nonfiction books a month. So it's nice being able to apply all of the knowledge that I learn as like a hobby learner, um, to things that I see in like pop culture. Because I also liked reading these stories and like seeing like what they're all about and see people miss things that I think are really interesting that we can discuss. And I'm hoping that in the new year, if we get the opportunity to roll out a literary liberation book club, I think it's gonna happen. It sounds like people are overwhelmingly positive about this and be able to talk to people pretty much real time
On the
about
books
some
we read.
different books. Yeah, I think it'll be really cool to have that community element because we right now it's just Kristen and me, um, sitting in our
We're in our own
rooms
echo chamber.
talking about books. Yes, literally, like what we're what Republicans' nightmares. We're
Yeah.
on the George Soros Antifa payroll. I'm sure that's what they think,
Yeah.
but
I wish I was getting paid for
yeah,
this.
right. That would be nice. I know if you tell people like I have gotten asked like, "Oh, do you make any money?" No.
I know. I'm like, oh yeah, like me and Mariah have been doing the podcast for over a year, and they're like, oh, like when can you get sponsors? Like, I don't know if I even want to sponsor something like this, you know?
No, I think the only thing that we would ever maybe do is help or like collaborate with maybe some like radical publishers like Verso or Pluto Press. I think that would be really fun, but I don't think we'll ever take any like
N-
proper sponsorships.
No, I don't think so. Unless it's like a cause that we're actually like to die for, you know?
Because I think the only thing that would make sense, because obviously like they need profits, is like we would have to find something that was like in relation to helping other people earn profits, and like we're also doing like the labor to help like build them up. So maybe somebody like who does like t-shirts, like revolutionary t-shirts or pamphlets
Hmm.
or um I don't know, stickers,
Or
something
I
like
could
that.
see
Like
us
we would
doing
be down.
something like if there was like a business that was like a worker co-op sort of thing too, where like that would be something we would partner.
Tunnel vision, hello. I'm just kidding.
We promote their pros and then get canceled.
I know. You know what? It's bound to happen. It's bound to
I'm gonna
happen,
be honest,
but
I own Tunnel Vision clothes and I think they're fine. They're not my favorite, but they're not the worst. That's my
and
opinion.
Kristen and I overwhelmingly support Madeline
Yeah,
Pennington. Like she's not ever said anything that I'm like, I staunchly
no.
disagree with this.
I
Like,
just think the problem is that it is very expensive, and I understand why it is so expensive, because like obviously they want to pay everybody that like works within like the design making and like actually making are getting paid a fair wage. But unfortunately, it's very unrealistic for most Americans to spend that much on fashion, which is why I think
I
people like
think
us prefer to just thrift.
mhm, the only like which like she gets, and I think this is like I'm gonna have to like cut all this out because I think it's like
Yeah,
I don't
this
know if
is
it's
not relevant at
relevant.
all.
Um, but like the overall quality of the products are something that are gonna last a long time. So if you're like investing in the products and you really like them, and it's like gonna be a like a staple piece in your collection for a really long time, I think that
I
works.
think the problem
But we
is
can wrap it up
with
if you
tunnel
want, and then we can
vision.
yeah.
Hold on. But hold on, the problem before I forget, because I'll forget what I was gonna say. The problem is with tunnel vision specifically, they don't do a lot of basics. Like they do a few like basic stuff, but I don't think like most of their stuff is very basic. Like because they are going for the more like goth sort of like alternative styles. So I think there's not a lot of basics involved in that. Like everything is very stylized. So you don't want to invest in something that's very stylized if you're not somebody that's like die hard goth or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I feel ya.
Okay, anyways, anything else we want to say? Mariah's
No,
gonna
I
link
think
the article and the William, whatever his name is, sorry, Wilhelm.
yes, I'll link both of those, and then I mean, this is the last episode for the spooky season, so if anyone is interested in a winter season, I have some ideas for different books that I think that we might be able to do or topics. So I think it's going to be kind of an amalgamation of whatever we want to do and talk about. We're not going to have a set schedule, but we have to plan that out. So if anyone has any suggestions, if you really like this, if you don't, if you like something else, let
Or
us
if you
know.
prefer
We're open.
something more like the summer miniseries, where it's more just us discussing, not necessarily discussing books either. If there's more just like you want us to talk about topics that are relevant on book talk, we could always do that too if you prefer that for like mini episodes. But while we will still have our regularly scheduled programming, 2 books a month, that will not change in the new year either.
Nope. Next book that's coming out next week will be
Slewfoot.
Slewfoot by Brahm.
Yes.
It'll be coming out on Halloween, so to conclude the Halloween season, we'll have probably like the most like Halloween core book we've had on the
We'll see.
podcast. Yes, it's very witchy, very spooky. The vibes.
Okay, if that's all, thank you and good night.